The unexpected discovery. Daniel Thompson woke up to the soft, familiar melody of his mother's voice, urging him out of bed. "Time to wake up, sweetheart," she called gently from their modest kitchen, where the comforting aroma of scrambled eggs and toast floated into his small room. The walls around him were decorated with posters of his favorite athletes, worn and fading but carefully arranged. It was a simple space, but to Daniel, it was home. As he dressed in his neatly pressed but well-worn school uniform, Daniel felt a surge of gratitude for his mother. Lisa Thompson worked tirelessly, juggling 2 jobs to ensure they had a roof over their heads and food on the table. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes she came home exhausted, but she never failed to offer him words of encouragement. "Remember, Danny," she'd often say, "it's not about what you have. It's about who you are." Daniel held on to those words as if they were a compass guiding him through life. They made him proud of his family, even if he sometimes wished he could do more to help his mother. Finishing his breakfast, he kissed her on the cheek, grabbed his backpack, and headed out the door with a cheerful, "Bye, Mom." The neighborhood he walked through was buzzing with its usual morning activity. Old Mr. Johnson sat on his porch, waving at Daniel as he passed. Daniel called a bright, "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," back and then jogged to catch up with his best friend, Jamal, who was waiting for him by the corner. They fell into an easy rhythm, their laughter filling the air as they shared jokes and stories about the weekend. But as they walked, something shiny caught Daniel's eye near the sidewalk. Curious, he veered toward it, noticing a leather wallet lying partially hidden under a pile of fallen leaves. Jamal stopped and peered over his shoulder. "What's that?" he asked, nudging Daniel with a grin. "Think someone dropped their allowance." Daniel chuckled, but as he picked up the wallet, his amusement faded. The wallet felt heavy in his hand, and when he opened it, he was stunned by what he saw. Neatly arranged $100 bills, crisp and clean, like they'd never been touched. There was a small, laminated card inside, and when he pulled it out, his heart skipped a beat. The name on the card read Thomas Carter. "Whoa," Jamal said, his eyes widening as he glimpsed the money inside. "That's gotta be hundreds of dollars, Danny. Do you know who this is?" Daniel nodded slowly, his mind racing. Thomas Carter was a name everyone in their city knew. Mr. Carter was a millionaire, a self-made businessman who'd built a fortune with his real estate ventures and investments. He owned properties all across the city and was known for his appearances in the local newspaper, often photographed at charity events or making speeches at business conferences. Daniel stared at the wallet, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He could feel Jamal's gaze on him, expectant and curious. Part of him wanted to just slip the wallet into his backpack and forget about it, but he remembered his mother's words. "It's not about what you have. It's about who you are." And Daniel knew who he was. A young boy who had been raised to do the right thing, even when no one was looking. "I'm taking it back to him," Daniel said finally, closing the wallet and stuffing it carefully into his backpack. Jamal gave him a look of disbelief. "Are you serious? Man, with all that cash, you could buy new shoes, maybe even help your mom out a bit." Daniel shook his head. "My mom taught me to be honest, Jamal. This money doesn't belong to us. Besides, if Mr. Carter lost his wallet, he might be worried. I know I would be." Jamal sighed but nodded. "You're right, Danny. Let's get going then. But you're gonna be late for school." Daniel knew Jamal was right. Returning the wallet meant he'd miss at least the first hour of classes, maybe more. But he felt a strange kind of resolve settle over him, a conviction that this was more important than a few tardy marks. "I'll catch up later," he told Jamal. "You go on ahead." With that, he turned and headed downtown, clutching the straps of his backpack, the weight of Mr. Carter's wallet resting heavily inside. The journey felt longer than usual, his mind filled with questions. Would Mr. Carter even be there? Would he believe a kid from a modest neighborhood had found his wallet and returned it without taking a single bill? As he walked through the bustling streets toward the city's business district, Daniel took in the unfamiliar sights. The buildings grew taller and sleeker, their polished exteriors reflecting the morning sun. He passed well-dressed people carrying leather briefcases and talking on shiny phones, their eyes flicking over him with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. He kept his head down, moving quickly, feeling a bit out of place in his old sneakers and scuffed backpack. Finally, he reached the towering glass structure that housed Mr. Carter's company. The building loomed above him, gleaming and pristine, making him feel small and insignificant. But he took a deep breath and stepped inside, his heart pounding as he approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a woman with perfect hair and a sharp, stylish suit, raised an eyebrow as she looked him over. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but somewhat skeptical. I'm here to see Mr. Thomas Carter," Daniel stammered, feeling his cheeks heat up. "I found his wallet and wanted to return it to him." The receptionist blinked, surprised, and then gave him a soft smile. "That's very honest of you," she said, her voice gentler. "Let me see if Mr. Carter is available." Daniel waited nervously, shifting from one foot to the other as she made a phone call. People moved around him, some glancing curiously in his direction. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist hung up and nodded at him. "Mr. Carter would like to see you. Take the elevator to the 30th floor, and his assistant will meet you there." Daniel nodded, swallowing his nerves as he made his way to the elevator. As the doors closed and he felt himself being whisked up to the top floor, his heart raced with anticipation. He could hardly believe he was about to meet the Thomas Carter, the man who represented everything his mother had told him about hard work and success. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel stepped out into a plush hallway lined with expensive-looking artwork and thick carpets that muffled his footsteps. A woman approached him, her smile warm as she extended her hand. "You must be Daniel," she said. "I'm Mr. Carter's assistant, Miss Parker. Follow me, please." Daniel nodded, his hands clammy as he trailed behind her down the hallway. They stopped in front of a large door, which Miss Parker opened with a quiet knock. Inside was an office larger than Daniel's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Behind an enormous desk sat Mr. Thomas Carter himself, a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and a thoughtful expression. Mr. Carter looked up as Daniel entered, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "So," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "you're the young man who found my wallet." Daniel nodded, his throat suddenly dry. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the wallet, holding it out with both hands. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I found it on the sidewalk this morning, and I thought you'd want it back." Mr. Carter stood, crossing the room with a slow, deliberate stride. He took the wallet, examining it for a moment before glancing back at Daniel. "You didn't take anything from it?" he asked, his tone not accusing but genuinely curious. "No, sir," Daniel replied, meeting Mr. Carter's gaze with unwavering honesty. "My mom taught me to do what's right." For a moment, Mr. Carter just looked at him, as if he were seeing something rare and valuable. Then, to Daniel's surprise, he smiled. "That's quite commendable, Daniel. Not everyone would have done what you did." Daniel felt a surge of pride, his mother's words echoing in his mind. He had done the right thing, and Mr. Carter had noticed. But what Daniel didn't know was that this was only the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would bring unexpected visitors to his school later that day, and forever change the course of his life. An unforeseen visit. Daniel returned to school feeling a sense of pride and relief. Despite the intimidating experience, he had done the right thing. He knew his mother would be proud, and that thought made his steps lighter as he entered the school gates. The late bell had already rung, so the halls were empty, and he hurried to his classroom, hoping to slip in unnoticed. But as he opened the door, every eye in the room turned to him. His teacher, Mrs. Johnson, paused in the middle of writing on the board and raised an eyebrow. "Daniel Thompson, you're late," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, clutching his backpack. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I had to return something to someone. It was important." Mrs. Johnson studied him for a moment, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She was a kind teacher, known for her patience and understanding. "Well, thank you for joining us. Have a seat, and we'll talk about this after class." Daniel nodded, quickly moving to his seat. As he settled in, his best friend, Jamal, leaned over and whispered, "Did you really go and return that wallet?" Daniel nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "Yeah, I did. I met Mr. Carter himself." Jamal's eyes widened. "No way. That's crazy. What did he say?" Daniel hesitated, recalling the moment in Mr. Carter's office. "He thanked me and he offered me a reward. But I didn't take it. I didn't do it for money." Jamal grinned, giving him a playful nudge. "Man, you're like some kind of hero. That's amazing." The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Daniel couldn't shake the memory of his encounter with Mr. Carter. The man's intense gaze, his words of praise, and the overwhelming size of his office. It was a world so different from his own, a glimpse into a life of wealth and power that he'd only seen in movies or read about in magazines. But as thrilling as it was, Daniel was content to leave it behind and return to the familiar, comforting routines of his everyday life. Or so he thought. That afternoon, just as the final bell rang and students began packing up to go home, the intercom crackled to life. "Attention, please," the principal's voice came through, calm but with a hint of urgency. "Would Daniel Thompson please report to the main office immediately?" Daniel Thompson to the main office. A hush fell over the classroom as his classmates exchanged curious glances. Daniel's heart sank. What could this be about? Had he done something wrong? Was Mr. Carter angry with him after all? He glanced at Jamal, who gave him a supportive nod. "Go on, Danny. It's probably nothing." But Daniel wasn't so sure. He felt a nervous knot tighten in his stomach as he gathered his things and made his way down the hallway to the main office. With each step, his mind raced, imagining worst-case scenarios. Had Mr. Carter accused him of stealing? Did he think Daniel had taken something from the wallet before returning it? When he reached the office, he saw Principal Rodriguez waiting for him with a serious expression. Her face softened when she saw him, but there was still an air of tension. "Daniel, please come with me," she said, gesturing for him to follow her. They walked down the corridor in silence, and as they approached the doors leading outside, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Through the glass, he could see two vehicles parked in front of the school, a sleek black sedan and a police car. The sight of the police car made his pulse race. Why were the police here? Stepping outside, Daniel saw a tall man in a dark suit standing by the sedan. It was Mr. Carter, looking as distinguished and imposing as he had in his office. Beside him was a uniformed police officer, his hands resting calmly at his sides. The principal cleared her throat. "Daniel, this is Mr. Thomas Carter. He's here to see you." Daniel swallowed, glancing between Mr. Carter and the police officer. He felt a wave of confusion and worry wash over him. "Hello, sir," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter smiled warmly, the stern lines of his face softening. "Hello, Daniel. I hope I didn't alarm you by coming here with Officer Johnson." He gestured to the police officer, who nodded politely. "We didn't mean to cause any concern, son," Officer Johnson said, his tone kind. "We're just here to talk." Daniel's brow furrowed. To talk. Mr. Carter nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Yes, Daniel. I wanted to thank you again for what you did today. I realized that a simple thank you wasn't enough. What you did, returning the wallet without expecting anything in return, is something rare. It speaks to the kind of person you are, and that's something worth recognizing." Daniel felt his cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. I just did what my mom taught me, sir." Mr. Carter's eyes softened, and he glanced at Officer Johnson, who smiled and gave a nod of encouragement. Daniel, Mr. Carter continued, I wanted to offer you something more than just a thank you. You see, I grew up in a neighborhood not so different from yours. I know what it's like to want a better life, to have dreams that seem far out of reach. And I also know that sometimes a little help can go a long way. Daniel looked up at him, unsure of where this was going. Help. Mr. Carter nodded. Yes, I'd like to set up a scholarship fund in your name, Daniel. It's my way of saying thank you and encouraging you to keep being the person you are. This fund will help cover your education expenses all the way through college if you choose to go. Daniel's eyes widened, his mind reeling as he tried to process what Mr. Carter was saying. A scholarship. For him. The idea was overwhelming, almost surreal. College had always seemed like a distant dream, something he hoped for, but wasn't sure he could afford. And now, here was a man offering him that chance, just because he'd returned a wallet. But why? Daniel stammered, feeling a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I didn't do anything special. Mr. Carter smiled, his eyes filled with genuine warmth. You did something very special, Daniel. You showed integrity and honesty, even when no one was watching. That's a rare quality, and it deserves to be rewarded. Before Daniel could respond, Officer Johnson stepped forward, his expression serious yet kind. Daniel, Mr. Carter, and I also wanted to make sure you were safe. We know that doing the right thing isn't always easy, especially when you live in a world that sometimes doesn't value honesty the way it should. We're here to let you know that if you ever need anything, there are people who believe in you and want to help. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The kindness, the support, the belief these strangers had in him, it was overwhelming. He'd never imagined that something as simple as returning a wallet could lead to this moment. Mr. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder once more. And Daniel, if it's all right with you, I'd like to meet your mother. I'd like to personally thank her for raising such an outstanding young man. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He knew his mother would be as surprised as he was, but he also knew she'd be proud. She'd always taught him that good deeds often led to unexpected rewards, though she'd never expected those rewards to be so grand. Yes, sir, Daniel replied, his voice filled with pride. She'd love to meet you too. A new world unfolds. That evening, Daniel couldn't contain his excitement. As he walked home, he clutched his backpack tightly, his mind racing with everything that had happened that day. The image of Mr. Carter and Officer Johnson standing outside his school, the words about a scholarship, and Mr. Carter's desire to meet his mother, all of it felt like a dream. He could hardly wait to tell his mother. When he finally reached their small apartment, he took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside, he found his mother, Lisa, sitting at their kitchen table, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. She looked up as he entered, her tired eyes lighting up with a smile. "There's my little man," she said warmly. "How was school?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, wondering how he could possibly explain everything. "It was eventful," he managed, his face breaking into a grin. He dropped his backpack and took a seat across from her, his hands fidgeting with excitement. His mother noticed his expression, raising an eyebrow. "Eventful, huh? What happened? Did you ace that math test?" Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "No, it's not about the test, Mom. I found something on my way to school. A wallet. And it belonged to this rich guy, Mr. Carter. You know him." Lisa's eyes widened as she leaned in, listening intently. "Thomas Carter, the businessman. Of course, I know who he is. What did you do with the wallet?" "I took it back to him," Daniel replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I went all the way to his office downtown and gave it to him. He thanked me. And he offered me money, but I didn't take it. I told him you taught me to always do the right thing." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to take his hands. "Oh, Daniel, I'm so proud of you. That was a very brave and honest thing to do." Daniel nodded, his cheeks flushing. "But Mom, that's not all." Mr. Carter and a police officer. They came to my school afterward. He said he wants to set up a scholarship fund for me. He said he wants to help me go to college. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. A scholarship? Daniel, are you serious? Daniel nodded, his grin widening. And Mom, he wants to meet you. He said he wants to thank you personally for raising me. For a moment, Lisa was silent, clearly trying to process what she'd just heard. A millionaire wanted to thank her, a simple waitress, for raising her son. The idea seemed impossible, like something out of a fairy tale. But as she looked at Daniel's eager, hopeful face, she knew it was real. Well, I suppose we can't keep Mr. Carter waiting, she said, wiping her eyes. When does he want to meet us? Daniel's smile faltered slightly. I don't know, actually. I didn't ask. I guess I was too shocked to think of that. Lisa chuckled, reaching out to ruffle his hair. That's all right, sweetheart. We'll figure it out. The next morning, just as they were finishing breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Lisa exchanged a glance with Daniel, who felt his heart leap in his chest. Could it be? When Lisa opened the door, she found Mr. Carter standing there, dressed in a sharp suit, a warm smile on his face. Behind him was Officer Johnson, who gave a polite nod. Both men seemed somewhat out of place in the small, cozy apartment hallway, but neither of them showed any discomfort. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Carter said, extending a hand. I hope we're not intruding. I wanted to meet you in person and express my gratitude. Lisa squeezed his hand. Sometimes, when people see others succeed, it makes them question their own lives. Some people react with jealousy or bitterness because it's easier than looking inward, but you can't let their negativity drag you down. Keep being true to yourself, and in time, people will see the real you. The next day, Daniel walked into school with his head held high. He wasn't going to let the whispers and the rumors stop him from being himself. He went to his classes, paid attention, and did his best on every assignment, determined to prove that he deserved the opportunities he'd been given. One afternoon, as he was heading to his locker, he was stopped by Ms. Rivera, one of his teachers. She was known for her strictness, but had a reputation for caring deeply about her students' success. Daniel, she said, smiling warmly, I heard about what Mr. Carter did for you. That's an incredible opportunity. How are you holding up? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. It's been a little hard, actually. Some people don't understand, and they think I don't deserve it. Ms. Rivera's expression softened. People will always have opinions, Daniel, but you can't let them define your worth. I see how hard you work, and I know you're deserving of every opportunity that comes your way. Keep your focus, stay humble, and keep moving forward. You're going to do amazing things. Her words lifted his spirits, and he left school that day feeling more confident. He was learning that while not everyone would support him, there were people who saw his potential and believed in him. That support became a source of strength, something he could hold on to during the challenging days. As the weeks went by, Daniel's life settled into a new rhythm. The initial excitement faded, but the gratitude he felt remained. His mother thrived in her new job, and they began to experience small comforts they hadn't known before. A little extra food in the fridge, a rare dinner at a restaurant, and the comforting knowledge that they wouldn't have to worry as much about rent. One day, Mr. Carter called Daniel to his office. Daniel felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as he made his way up to the familiar 30th floor. When he entered, Mr. Carter was waiting with a warm smile. Daniel, he began, motioning for him to sit. I've been hearing wonderful things about you. Your teachers speak highly of your dedication, and your mother tells me you're helping her around the house more than ever. I'm very proud of you. Daniel smiled shyly. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm trying my best. Mr. Carter leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm starting a mentorship program for young people who show potential but may not have all the resources to reach their goals. I want you to be the first participant. We'll pair you with professionals who can guide you, answer questions, and even help with your studies. Daniel's eyes widened. A mentorship program. For me. Mr. Carter nodded, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. Yes, for you. I believe you're capable of great things, Daniel. And I want to make sure you have every resource you need to succeed. You'll meet with your mentor once a week, here at my office or wherever is convenient for you, and they'll help you navigate any challenges that come your way. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude, barely able to find the words. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I don't know what to say. This means everything to me. Mr. Carter smiled, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You've already said it, Daniel, by showing who you are. Keep being true to yourself, and remember that we're all rooting for you. As Daniel left the office that day, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a kid from a poor neighborhood anymore. He was someone with dreams, ambitions, and the support to make them a reality. And as he walked home, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the strength and integrity his mother had instilled in him. Rising above the doubts. The mentorship program brought a whirlwind of new experiences into Daniel's life. Every Thursday after school, he would take the bus downtown to Mr. Carter's office, where he would meet his mentor, a young engineer named Marcus Lane. Marcus was a tall, confident man in his early 30s, with a friendly smile and an easygoing demeanor. From the first day, he made Daniel feel comfortable, treating him not as a kid, but as someone with potential. All right, Daniel, Marcus had said on their first meeting, sliding a notebook across the table toward him. This is your success journal. I want you to use it to write down your goals, ideas, and even your worries. Every week, we'll go over it together. Think of this as a place where you can plan your future, embracing new opportunities. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change for both Daniel and his mother, Lisa. Word spread quickly throughout their neighborhood and Daniel's school about the scholarship and Mr. Carter's unexpected kindness. Teachers who once saw Daniel as a quiet, hard-working student now looked at him with admiration and respect. His classmates whispered excitedly about his story, turning him into something of a local hero. Daniel, however, remained humble, focused on his studies and his mother's joy. For Lisa, the change was even more profound. On Monday morning, she walked into Mr. Carter's office building, this time not as a visitor but as a new employee. Her heart raced as she took the elevator to the 30th floor, her hands nervously clutching the strap of her handbag. She had never imagined working in a place like this, where the floors gleamed, the furniture was sleek and modern, and everyone wore crisp, professional attire. It was a world far removed from the noisy, crowded diner where she'd spent the past decade as a waitress. When she arrived at the office, Mr. Carter greeted her warmly, introducing her to the team. Her position was as a part-time administrative assistant, a role that offered flexible hours and benefits, something she had only dreamed of. The pay was nearly double what she had been making before, and Mr. Carter had personally assured her that she would have room to grow within the company if she wished. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Lisa thanked Mr. Carter with tears in her eyes. "You're changing our lives, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't thank you enough." Mr. Carter smiled, his expression gentle. "You and Daniel deserve this, Lisa. Integrity and hard work deserve to be rewarded, and I'm happy to have you here. Just remember, you earned this opportunity, and I believe in your potential." As Lisa settled into her new role, she quickly proved herself to be a dedicated and diligent worker. She stayed late when needed, organized files meticulously, and handled every task with a level of professionalism that impressed her colleagues. For the first time, she felt valued and respected, not just as an employee but as a person. Meanwhile, Daniel adjusted to his new reality with a mixture of excitement and determination. Knowing he had a scholarship in his name motivated him to work even harder in school. Every evening, he sat at the kitchen table with his books spread out, his head bent over his homework, as he tackled each problem with a fierce focus. His mother would occasionally pause in her own work, sorting papers or organizing notes for the next day, to look at him with pride, her heart swelling with hope for the future. But not everyone was happy with Daniel's sudden rise. Some of the kids at school, especially those from more privileged backgrounds, began to view him with a mixture of envy and suspicion. They couldn't understand why Mr. Carter, a wealthy businessman, would take such an interest in a boy from their side of town. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that Daniel must have done something underhanded to get the scholarship, while others mocked him for being a charity case. Daniel tried to ignore the snide remarks and the cold stares, but they weighed on him more than he let on. One afternoon, as he sat alone in the cafeteria, he overheard a group of boys laughing at him from a nearby table. "Look, it's the golden boy," one of them sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must be nice to have a rich guy take care of everything for you." Another boy snickered. "Yeah, must be nice to not have to work for anything." Daniel clenched his fists under the table, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. He wanted to shout at them, to tell them they had no idea what his life was like, how hard his mother worked, how much he'd given up just to do the right thing. But he forced himself to take a deep breath, remembering his mother's words. "It's not about what people say, it's about who you are." He stood up, picking up his lunch tray, and walking past the boys without a word. As he exited the cafeteria, he felt a pang of sadness, realizing that even good deeds could sometimes lead to resentment. But he reminded himself that he hadn't done any of this for recognition or rewards. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. That evening, as he sat with his mother, he finally confided in her about the teasing and the rumors. Lisa listened quietly, her face growing serious. "Oh, Danny," she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I know it hurts when people say things like that. But remember, their words don't define you. You know who you are, and so do I." Mr. Carter sees it too. The people who matter in your life understand your heart. Daniel nodded, his mother's words giving him a renewed sense of strength. "Thanks, Mom. I just wish people didn't see me like that." Lisa shook his hand, her face a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Mr. Carter, this is such an honor. Please, come in." They stepped into the modest apartment, looking around with a respectful appreciation. The place was small but tidy, with old but well-kept furniture. A couple of family photos decorated the walls, showing Daniel as a baby and Lisa looking young and radiant, despite the clear signs of struggle etched into her face. Mr. Carter took a seat at the kitchen table, and Officer Johnson leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but attentive. Daniel and his mother sat across from them, and for a moment, there was a gentle, comfortable silence. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Carter began, his voice soft, "I want you to know that your son is one of the most remarkable young men I've ever met. In a world where people often look out for themselves, Daniel did something truly selfless, and that speaks volumes about the kind of upbringing he's had." Lisa's cheeks flushed, and she looked at Daniel with a mixture of pride and love. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. It means the world to hear that. I've done my best to teach him to be honest and kind, even when times are tough." Mr. Carter nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can see that, Mrs. Thompson, and that's why I want to do something meaningful for both of you." He paused, glancing at Officer Johnson, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "I understand that life hasn't been easy for you and Daniel," Mr. Carter continued gently. "I grew up in a similar situation, and I know what it's like to struggle. So I'd like to set up a college scholarship for Daniel. And if you're open to it, I'd also like to offer you a position within my company, something that pays well and provides stable hours, so you can spend more time with Daniel." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, her hand flying to her mouth. "A job, for me, and a scholarship for Daniel. Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say." "There's no need to say anything," he replied, his tone sincere. "I believe that good people deserve opportunities, and you've clearly raised a good son." Lisa glanced at Daniel, who was beaming with pride. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Mr. Carter, This is more than we could have ever dreamed of. I accept. And I promise to work as hard as I can." "Mom," Daniel chimed in, his voice filled with excitement, "isn't this amazing? This could change everything for us." Lisa nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yes, Danny, it really could." After discussing some details, Mr. Carter and Officer Johnson prepared to leave. But as they stood at the door, Mr. Carter turned to Daniel one last time. "Daniel, I want you to remember something," he said, his gaze steady and intense. "Integrity is a rare and valuable trait. You showed it when you returned my wallet, and that's something no one can ever take from you. Keep that honesty in your heart, no matter where life takes you." Daniel nodded, the words resonating deeply. "I will, Mr. Carter. I promise." With a final handshake, Mr. Carter and Officer Johnson left, leaving Daniel and his mother standing in the doorway, still absorbing everything that had happened. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, each seeing the future that only a day ago had seemed unreachable. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. He replayed the events of the past 2 days over and over in his mind, feeling as though he were living in a dream. But it was real. Mr. Carter had set up a scholarship for him, and his mother would have a job that would finally allow them to breathe a little easier. He thought about Mr. Carter's words, the way the man had looked at him with respect and admiration. It made him feel like he was capable of anything, like he could achieve whatever he set his mind to. And he knew that this was only the beginning. With the support of his mother, Mr. Carter, and the values he held dear, Daniel was ready to face whatever the future held. Meanwhile, in his own home, Mr. Carter sat alone in his study, reflecting on the young boy who had changed his life in a matter of hours. In Daniel, he saw a reflection of himself as a young man, a boy with integrity, courage, and a kind heart. And as he stared out the window at the city lights, he knew that helping Daniel was the best decision he'd ever made. But he also knew that their story was far from over. There was more he could do for Daniel, and as he pondered the possibilities, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just giving back. He was investing in a future, one he believed would shine brightly because of Daniel's presence in it. Daniel stared at the notebook, feeling a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. He had never thought about his goals in such a concrete way. Sure, he had dreams, like maybe becoming an architect or a designer, building things that people could use and admire. But no one had ever told him he could actually reach those dreams. For weeks, Daniel and Marcus met regularly. They discussed everything from study habits to long-term planning. Marcus taught him how to set achievable goals, how to manage his time better, and even how to handle stress when things got tough. They worked on math problems, talked about college applications, and discussed what it would take to get a scholarship to a prestigious school. As Daniel wrote in his success journal each week, he began to feel his confidence growing. He started seeing himself not just as a kid from a struggling neighborhood, but as someone with a future, someone with a path he could follow. With Marcus's guidance, he learned to break down his big dreams into smaller, manageable steps. And most importantly, he learned that his dreams were within reach. One evening, after a particularly enlightening session with Marcus, Daniel returned home to find his mother waiting for him at the kitchen table. She had a proud but worried look in her eyes, a look Daniel had seen before whenever she was concerned about him. "Danny," she began, her voice soft, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You're doing so well, and I can see how much you're growing. But I also know that with all this attention, there might be people who don't want to see you succeed." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He knew exactly what she meant. Some kids at school still resented him, whispering behind his back, calling him teacher's pet or Carter's charity case. They couldn't understand why someone like him, from his background, was receiving so much support. Sometimes, the looks and whispers made him feel like he was carrying a weight he hadn't asked for. "I know, Mom," he replied quietly, "but I'm trying not to let it get to me. I keep reminding myself of what you taught me, that it doesn't matter what others think as long as I know who I am. Lisa smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. That's right, baby. You're on a path to something great. Don't let anyone make you feel small because they can't see your worth. Her words strengthened him, and over the next few weeks, Daniel focused even more on his studies, determined to prove to himself and to the doubters that he was worthy of every opportunity he'd been given. One afternoon, Marcus arranged a visit for Daniel to a construction site where a team of architects and engineers were working on a new building. When Daniel arrived, he was awestruck by the towering cranes, the complex blueprints, and the coordinated efforts of the workers and designers. Marcus introduced him to the lead architect, a woman named Sandra Kim, who welcomed Daniel with a warm handshake and an encouraging smile. "Marcus tells me you're interested in design," Sandra said, her eyes twinkling. "Do you want to be an architect one day?" Daniel nodded, feeling both excited and nervous. "Yes, ma'am. I think so. I love the idea of creating things that people can use and enjoy." Sandra chuckled. "That's exactly how I felt at your age. Architecture is a blend of art and science. It takes patience, creativity, and a lot of hard work. But if you're passionate about it, there's nothing like seeing your designs come to life." She handed him a set of blueprints, explaining each line and symbol with enthusiasm. Daniel listened intently, absorbing every word. For the first time, he could truly picture himself in this world, wearing a hard hat, holding blueprints, and leading a team to create something meaningful. He felt a surge of inspiration, as if the universe were telling him, "This is your path." As they walked around the site, Marcus and Sandra talked to him about the education and experience required to become an architect. They encouraged him to keep studying hard, to excel in math and science, and to never stop asking questions. "You're lucky, Daniel," Sandra said, her tone gentle but serious. "A lot of people don't get the kind of support you're receiving at your age. Don't waste it. And remember, success isn't just about talent. It's about perseverance." Those words stayed with Daniel long after he left the site. He replayed them in his mind like a mantra, pushing himself to work harder, to study longer, and to believe in his potential, even on the tough days. But the whispers and jealousy at school didn't stop. One afternoon, as he was heading to his locker, he found himself confronted by Eric, one of the boys who had been especially vocal about his dislike for Daniel's new life. "Hey, Thompson," Eric sneered, blocking Daniel's path. "Must be nice getting everything handed to you. You think you're better than us now, don't you?" Daniel took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. "I don't think I'm better than anyone, Eric. I'm just trying to make the most of an opportunity." "Yeah, right," Eric scoffed, crossing his arms. "You don't deserve any of this. Just because some rich guy took pity on you doesn't mean you're special." Daniel felt a flash of anger, but he forced himself to stay composed. He looked Eric in the eye, his voice steady. "You're right, Eric. I didn't ask for any of this, but I'm grateful for it, and I'm going to use it to make a better life for myself and my mom. You don't have to understand, but I'm not going to apologize for it." Eric seemed taken aback by Daniel's response, his sneer fading as he struggled to come up with a retort. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone but feeling stronger than ever. Later that day, during his meeting with Marcus, Daniel shared the incident, feeling a mixture of frustration and relief. "Why can't they just be happy for me?" he asked, his voice tinged with sadness. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want to do something good with my life." Marcus listened thoughtfully, nodding. "Unfortunately, Daniel, not everyone will understand your journey. Some people feel threatened when they see others rise, especially when it challenges their assumptions about what's possible. But remember, you're not doing this for them. You're doing this for yourself, and for the people who believe in you." Daniel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. I'm not going to let them drag me down." As the weeks went on, Daniel continued to thrive under Marcus's mentorship. He spent hours studying, pushing himself to excel in his classes, and even volunteering at a local community center to tutor younger kids in math. He found joy in helping others, feeling a sense of purpose that went beyond his own goals. One day, as he was leaving the community center, he saw Mr. Carter waiting for him outside, leaning against his sleek black sedan with a proud smile. "Daniel," Mr. Carter greeted him, extending a hand. "I heard you've been helping out with tutoring here." "That's impressive." Daniel shook his hand, feeling a rush of pride. "I just wanted to give back, sir. I know how much people have done for me, and I want to pay it forward." Mr. Carter nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of attitude I hope to see in you. You know, Daniel, I believe you're going to do great things, not just for yourself, but for others. You have a gift, and I'm glad to see you sharing it." They stood together in silence for a moment, both of them gazing at the community center and the neighborhood beyond. It was a simple, unspoken understanding, one that transcended words. As they drove back to Daniel's apartment, Mr. Carter spoke thoughtfully. "Daniel, I've been thinking. When you're ready, I'd like to help you secure an internship at one of the top architecture firms in the city. It will be a challenge, but I believe you're ready for it. It's time for you to see what's truly possible." Daniel's heart raced with excitement. An internship at a real architecture firm. The idea seemed almost too good to be true, but as he looked at Mr. Carter's encouraging smile, he realized that this was his reality. A reality he had earned, step by step, with hard work, integrity, and the support of people who believed in him. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I'll make the most of this. I promise." And as he walked into his apartment that night, Daniel knew that he was on the path to a dream in the making. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his hand shaking as he held a letter emblazoned with the logo of Redding and Moore, one of the most prestigious architecture firms in the city. He had applied for the internship that Mr. Carter had recommended, and now, here in his hands, was the response. His mother sat beside him, her eyes wide with excitement and hope. The air was thick with anticipation as Daniel tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. He scanned the words quickly, his heart pounding. Then, a smile broke across his face. "Mom," he whispered, barely able to believe it. "I got it. They accepted me." Lisa's face lit up, and she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "Oh, Danny, I'm so proud of you. This is everything we've dreamed of." Daniel felt a mix of joy and disbelief. He had been given an opportunity to intern at one of the top architecture firms, something he had never dared to imagine before. For him, this was more than just a job. It was a chance to learn from the best, to build skills and connections that would shape his future. And above all, it was a step toward making his dream of becoming an architect a reality. As the days passed, Daniel prepared for his first day at Redding and Moore with a mixture of excitement and nerves. He and his mother shopped for new clothes, a crisp button-down shirt, and a pair of neatly pressed slacks. It was a modest outfit, but for Daniel, it felt like wearing armor, giving him the confidence he needed to step into a world he'd once thought was out of reach. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel woke up early, his heart racing with anticipation. As he got dressed, he couldn't help but glance at himself in the mirror, adjusting his collar and smoothing his hair. He looked different, older, more confident. This wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. When he arrived at Redding and Moore's headquarters, he was greeted by a sleek, modern building with towering glass windows that reflected the morning sun. He took a deep breath, steeling himself as he entered the lobby. Everything about the building was intimidating, from the polished marble floors to the bustling professionals hurrying past him, each one looking focused and determined. At the reception desk, a friendly woman named Carla handed him a visitor's badge. "Welcome to Redding and Moore, Daniel," she said with a warm smile. "We're excited to have you here." He nodded, trying to hide his nerves. "Thank you, Mom." Carla led him down a long hallway, explaining the layout of the building and the departments he'd be working with. When they reached a spacious office filled with architectural models and blueprints, Carla gestured to a man standing by a large drafting table. He was tall and thin, with graying hair and a sharp, focused gaze. He turned as they approached, and Carla introduced him. "Daniel, this is Mr. Andrew Lawson, one of our senior architects. He'll be your mentor for the duration of your internship." Mr. Lawson extended a hand, his expression appraising but kind. "Good to meet you, Daniel. I've heard a lot about you from Mr. Carter. He speaks very highly of you." Daniel shook his hand, feeling the surge of pride. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here." Mr. Lawson nodded, motioning for Daniel to follow him. "Let's get started. We're working on some exciting projects, and I'd like you to be involved in as much as possible. I believe in hands-on learning, so don't expect to spend much time just observing. You're here to contribute." As they walked through the office, Daniel was in awe of the creative energy around him. Architects and designers were huddled over blueprints, sketching ideas, discussing plans, and bringing structures to life with their imagination and skill. He felt like he was stepping into the heart of something magnificent, a place where dreams took shape and transformed into reality. Over the next few weeks, Daniel threw himself into his work. Every day was a new challenge, but he was determined to prove himself. Mr. Lawson was a demanding mentor, but he was also generous with his knowledge, teaching Daniel not just about architecture, but about the importance of precision, creativity, and teamwork. One evening, as they were working late on a project, Mr. Lawson paused to study Daniel's sketches. "You've got talent, Daniel," he said thoughtfully. "But talent alone isn't enough in this field. Architecture is about resilience, about seeing things through to the end, even when it gets tough." Daniel nodded, taking in every word. He had learned that lesson from his mother, from Mr. Carter, and from all the struggles he'd faced. Now he was living it every day. One afternoon, as Daniel was organizing some files, Mr. Lawson approached him with a smile. "Daniel, I'd like you to join us for a site visit tomorrow. We're working on a community center project downtown, and I think it would be a great experience for you." A site visit. The words filled Daniel with excitement and nerves. He had seen blueprints and models, but the thought of seeing an actual construction site, of watching a building come together piece by piece, thrilled him. He knew this was an incredible opportunity to learn and to see the reality of architecture beyond the drafting table. The next day, Daniel joined the team at the construction site, donning a hard hat and safety vest as he followed Mr. Lawson and a group of engineers through the bustling work zone. The sounds of machinery and voices filled the air, and the structure of the community center loomed above them, half-finished but already impressive. Mr. Lawson gestured to the skeletal frame of the building, explaining each step of the construction process, from the foundation to the beams that held everything together. Daniel listened intently, his mind racing with questions. As they walked around the site, Daniel noticed a group of local children watching from behind a fence, their faces filled with curiosity. He remembered himself at their age, gazing at the city's tall buildings and wondering what it would be like to create something so lasting and grand. One of the children, a boy about 10 years old, called out to him, "Hey, mister, are you one of the builders?" Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Not yet, but I'm learning." The boy grinned, his eyes wide with admiration. "I want to build things too someday." Daniel crouched down, looking at the boy seriously. "Then you can. Work hard, stay curious, and always believe in yourself. You'd be surprised what you can achieve." The boy nodded, his face lighting up with hope. And in that moment, Daniel realized just how far he had come. He was no longer the kid from a modest neighborhood, unsure of his future. He was becoming someone who could inspire others, who could show them that their dreams were within reach, no matter where they came from. As the internship progressed, Daniel continued to impress everyone around him. He became known for his dedication, his attention to detail, and his willingness to learn. Even Mr. Lawson, who was known for being reserved and hard to impress, praised him openly. One evening, after a particularly challenging project was completed, Mr. Carter invited Daniel and his mother to a dinner celebration at a fancy restaurant. For Daniel and Lisa, it was a surreal experience, dining among successful professionals, eating food they'd never tasted before, and realizing that they belonged there, not as guests, but as equals. During the dinner, Mr. Carter raised a glass in Daniel's honor. "To Daniel Thompson," he said, his voice filled with pride. "A young man who embodies honesty, integrity, and resilience. You've come a long way, Daniel, and I have no doubt you'll go even further." The guests clinked their glasses, and Daniel felt the warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the wine in his glass. He glanced at his mother, who was wiping a tear from her eye, her face beaming with pride. As the evening wore on, Daniel found himself reflecting on his journey, the wallet he had found, the decision to return it, the kindness of Mr. Carter, the support of his mother, and the opportunities that had followed. It all seemed like a series of small choices that had led to this moment, each one opening a door to something bigger and brighter. In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued to thrive. His internship turned into a part-time position, allowing him to work alongside his studies. He spent his days learning, designing, and creating, his mind constantly filled with new ideas and visions for the future. Years passed, and Daniel's dedication paid off. He graduated with honors from a top university, with a degree in architecture and a reputation as one of the most promising young talents in the field. With Mr. Carter's mentorship and his mother's unwavering support, he landed a job at a prestigious firm, where he began working on projects that would shape the city's landscape. One day, as he stood on the site of his very own project, a community center in his old neighborhood, Daniel looked around, taking in the sights and sounds. The building was still under construction, but he could already see the impact it would have, a place where kids like him could find inspiration and hope. A group of children watched him from a distance, their faces filled with curiosity. One of them called out, "Hey, mister, are you the one building this?" Daniel smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride and purpose. "Yes," he replied, his voice strong. "Yes, I am." And as he looked at the future rising before him, Daniel knew that his journey was far from over. He had not only built a life for himself, but had become a beacon for others, a reminder that with integrity, hard work, and a little bit of kindness, anything was possible.